Hello learners, I welcome you all to the 60th lecture for the course on International Investment Law and the Environment. This is the last lecture for this particular course. So in this lecture, I wanted to conclude by talking about ISTS reforms and the environment. In fact, the lecture is titled like this, ISTS reforms and the environment. ISTS is very unique in the context of settling international disputes, and there is an existing mechanism for resolving investment disputes, and there are certain criticism leveled against it. And one of the criticism is that this particular system does not allow for integration of environmental principles within the field of international investment law, because the existing system of resolving investment disputes may be perceived to be friendlier to protecting investors' interest. Right, so that's the dichotomy, or that's the debate about. Is it true? I mean, we cannot underplay the significance of ISTS, because if you see from 2014 to 2024, I am taking this as the sample period, around 370 plus treaties were signed between the countries, and there were many disputes, almost around 700 plus ISTS disputes that were filed during this particular period as well. 750 plus. The number of treaties, the number of disputes. So that shows the growing significance of ISTS, as well as the growing significance of inflow of foreign direct investment, and how countries want inflow of foreign direct investment, especially the host states, the developing countries. So now, on the one side, we do see the normative framework of international investment regime that comes from these bilateral investment treaties and treaties with investment provision is only growing. Countries are trying to increasingly regulate international investment regime through these treaties. So that's only growing. And at the same time, the number of disputes are also growing. So how do we ensure that ISTS reforms also protect or respect the principles protecting the environment? How do we do that? It is not the traditionally how the investment disputes were filed against expropriation and nationalization. That does not hold true anymore. We had seen a decline in the number of expropriation cases. We had seen an increase in the regulatory measures being challenged. There is no outright expropriation anymore these days, because countries also want to protect the reputation that they are very friendlier to attracting investment. So there are no outright expropriation. So when the traditionally what used to be challenged as an investment dispute, that is not there. Now with increased regulatory measures are being challenged, it becomes pertinent for us to examine what sort of a measure are being challenged. Mostly, public health measures, environmental measures, all of these are getting challenged as violations of the protections given under a bilateral investment treaty. So when regulatory measures are being challenged, we do see a shift from how ISTS used to operate earlier to now increase regulatory environmental challenges. I think this is not something that we will have to emphasize on, because at least almost every scholars would agree that regulatory measures are increasingly being challenged, and some of these regulatory measures are environmental regulatory measures. So we can take this to be a given. So when there is a shift in the pattern of the kind of investment disputes, does there a shift in terms of the normative framework that are provided by these treaties as well? There also we do see there's a shift in the language of the treaty, and we could probably classify into different generations also, and we do see a shift in the objective of these treaties as well. If we look at the first generation treaties and the focus of the earlier treaties that were concluded, and the focus of the government while approaching these treaties, the focus was on economic development. And maybe that is why the provisions that you find in first generation treaties only talk about investor protections, because it was believed that FDI results in economic development, and that is what the host state wanted. But now increasingly there's a renewed focus on renegotiating the objective of the very instrument, the BIT or a TIP itself, and the focus is not economic development anymore, it is sustainable development. Look at UNCTAD's investment policy framework for sustainable development. There's always been a nudge towards these instruments that establish the normative framework governing international investment regime to focus on sustainable development, to move away from economic development to sustainable development. That is also been there, and this is also clearly established. Take any newer generation treaties, you will always find the focus is on sustainable development, it is not anymore on economic development. So that shift had also happened. So simultaneous to the shift where increased regulatory measures are challenged by the investor, we do see a shift in the normative framework governing international investment regime. So the provisions in the bilateral investment treaty as well as treaty with investment provision also has a shift from focusing on economic development to sustainable development. So that is there. Okay. So then what are the problems that is there? So the problems that we do face, or in the context of integrating environmental principles within the international investment law, is that how these disputes were decided. That is why we had focused on past decided cases for 3 weeks of the course. 6th week, 7th week and 8th week. 3 weeks of the course we discuss these cases in detail, so that we get a clarity on how different arbitral tribunals have approached these issues, and especially when an environmental measures were being challenged. So there we cannot again deny the fact that there is difference in the approach of arbitral tribunals. Take for instance, on one end of the spectrum, metal clad tribunals award, right, and then on the other end of the spectrum we have Methanex award. So there is again difference in approach of the arbitral tribunals. That is exactly why in the 10th week of the course and in the 11th week of the course we discussed various ways in which these could be addressed. We have discussed from how the countries can agree on applicable law, and if the applicable law includes international environmental agreements or international environmental principles, then there's a possibility of integrating that while deciding an investment dispute. We looked at the principle of systemic interpretation. We looked at the standards of review that may be employed by arbitral tribunals. Again, that is one of the biggest cause why there has been difference in approaches. Even in the 5th week of the course, we had seen broadly there are 3 kinds of approaches that are taken by arbitral tribunals in order to distinguish between an indirect expropriation and a legitimate regulatory measures, right? So there's a police powers doctrine, there's sole effect doctrine, there's weighing and balancing approach. All of these we have already discussed in detail. And then we've also discussed how Burke, White and Staden have argued that increasingly in investment arbitration, the standard of review of the private law origin has been applied instead of public law standard of review. So that also we have discussed. So essentially there are 4 things that I have looked at for this particular course. And how can we reconcile environmental principles within the broader international investment law? One is treaty drafting. This is what we'd seen in the 9th week of the course. Increasingly now there are provisions addressing environmental protection in the BITs, but we took a qualitative review of these provisions in the 9th week of the course, and somehow we have arrived at this could arrive at the fact that general exception clause is something that could give you the added protection for the host state for exercising their regulatory right and enact environmental measures, because when you have a general exception clause, that then the host state can derogate from any of the other commitments that is there. But otherwise they can also take for a specific exception, particular exception, to the substantive provisions as well. So whatever suits the needs of the country, they could take such a treaty drafting exercise and then protect their regulatory power by clarifying the same in the context of treaty itself. So the very first thing we have done in this course is to undertake treaty drafting reforms, right? So that's the first thing through which environmental principles can be reconciled in international investment law. Also, we did look at some of the procedural reforms that could be undertaken. We looked at amicus curiae participation, we looked at increased transparency. All of these would strengthen the fact that that the host states can effectively exercise their regulatory right and enact environmental regulatory measure. In fact, earlier BITs were concluded only in the presence of government representatives. Not much was discussed other than the fact that a BIT has been concluded. But now there is a public debate that surrounds the signing of bilateral investment treaties or treaty with investment provisions. Look at the recent EU negotiations with Canada, US, and look at the increased amount of public debates. This is something we can also see in the context of multilateral agreement on investment. We had discussed this in the 4th week of the course as well, when OECD, after the establishment of World Trade Organization, OECD thought that the time was ripe to have a multilateral agreement on investment, started the negotiation. We do see an increased participation by non-governmental organizations, right? So that was also there. So now there's a public scrutiny in terms of what sort of treaties that the countries are signing. So maybe with the increased public scrutiny, the countries started including provisions with regard to environmental protections, at least in the preamble, right? So, I mean, if you have it only in the preamble without any substantive provisions in the treaty, then in my opinion, that's more like a lip service, but we still cannot undermine such a provision in the preamble itself, because we've seen US shrimp case, how it was interpreted in the context of World Trade Organization, where they looked at the preamble of the Marrakesh Agreement and referred to, and gave a broader interpretation to one of the provisions of GATT, Article 20G. So having an environmental protection in preamble also would strengthen would contribute to the fact that the tribunal may rule in favor of the host state, that is there. But then ideally, we'd argued in this course that a substantive provision is also required, other than the fact that you'd mentioned about environmental protection in the preamble. So that is treaty reforms. And transparency and amicus curiae participation would probably strengthen the technical aspects, right? So why technical aspects are important? Because we've seen investors have been asking for scientific evidence from the host state for enacting environmental regulatory measure. They asked what is the basis on which you have enacted this measure. So that the technical capacity or the fact that scientific evidence had to be given by the host state, that may become burdensome for some of the countries. We'd seen in Methanex case, United States had conducted a peer review. It had given funds to University of California to conduct a scientific study. All of that had happened. Similarly, if we look at a public health case, it's not an environmental case, a public health case, the tobacco case, where Uruguay had taken anti-smoking measures, the single presentation requirement and 80-20, 80-80 rule, where 80% of the cigarette packaging should have warning label. So there the tribunal stated that the developing country can rely on international standards and they need not conduct their own scientific review. So increasingly, when investors are asking for scientific review, that sort of increases the burden on the part of the host state. They had to spend so much of money in conducting this scientific review and then take a decision. So the technical competence of the host state gets questioned here, then amicus curiae participation could ease that particular burden. So procedural reforms also would go a long way in strengthening the right of the host state to enact environmental regulatory measure. So that is also an aspect that we've covered. So we've covered this in 10th and 11th week of the course. Then if we look at after procedural reforms, we can also look at the standard of review. Standard of review has been a biggest concern with, I mean, this is evident. You look at the cases that the very few cases that we've discussed in the 6th, 7th and 8th week of the courses, different tribunals adopting different standards of review. We've already discussed this in detail. If at all, wide margin of appreciation is given to the host state, proportionality analysis undertaken, then that would strengthen the integration of environmental principles in the field of international environment law. That is with regard to the standard of review. Fourthly, we'd also discuss very briefly about the compensation standards. While discussing Marian Ungalev versus Costa Rica, also it expressed the same opinion, where Charzo factory standard was applied in order to calculate the compensation. So we argued that in case of an environmental measure, probably no compensation would be the ideal way to go ahead. But even if because of the factual circumstance of Marian Ungalev case, where expropriation decree had come, but neither expropriation had happened, nor compensation was paid, nor the investor was allowed to develop the investment. So in those sort of a situation, when compensation had to be paid, maybe that the compensation standard could be relatively lower, or could commensurate the same as that of a direct expropriation instead of awarding Charzo standard, right? So compensation standard could also in one way help in reconciling environmental principles within the field of international investment law, because we've seen that when huge compensation is awarded to the investor, that could contribute to regulatory chill and race to the bottom. So then that becomes problematic. We'd already discussed about the concept of regulatory chill and race to the bottom as well. If this happens, then some countries may be considered as pollution havens, and then all the industries could move there. And environmental harm is not something that is particular to one territory. Environmental concerns are common to all countries. So ideally, at one point, somebody would ask this question: if you want to strengthen the environmental protection in your country, the best way to go ahead is through enacting domestic legislation. Agreed, no question about it. But the reason why we are looking at integrating environmental principles within the broader field of international investment law is, what if the host states do not enact environmental protection legislations in their country? What if they act as pollution havens? What if there's a race to the bottom where the countries are relaxing their environmental standards in order to attract FDI? At the same time, this environmental concerns are not territorial in nature, right? So pollution that happens in one country will affect will have far-reaching consequences across the world. So at that point of time, at least in my opinion, it is something that has to be addressed in the context of international investment law itself, because even when you have international environmental agreements, they do operate in a soft law framework, whereas investors' protections operate in a hard law framework. So therefore, reconciling environmental principles within the framework of international investment law would be a best way to ensure that there's a balance between environmental interest as well as investors' interest. I am again not arguing that, we've discussed about all these four things: treaty reforms, procedural reforms, standard of review reforms, and compensation reforms. But that does not mean regulatory autonomy of the host state should be given a lot of significance, right? Then that may result in regulatory arbitrariness also, right? Then the investor is subject to a very arbitrary and an unreasonable investment environment in the home state. That's not what we are talking about. We are talking about a balance between environmental interest and investors' interest, and these balance can be found through the kind of initiatives that we've discussed throughout the course, especially from 9th week onwards, from treaty drafting to procedural reforms to compensation reforms to standard of reviews. There is a possibility of integrating environmental principles within the field of international investment law. So I think with this, we can conclude this lecture, as well as we've come to the conclusion of the course itself. Thank you so much for taking this course and watching all the videos and reading all the text that we provided, and for taking an interest in this field of trying to integrate environmental principles in the broader framework of international investment law. So thank you for being wonderful learners, and with that I will end the course and the lecture, and I'm hoping to see you once again in some other course, probably in the field of international economic law. Thank you.